In recent decades, an extraterrestrial civilization has marked its presence on our planet. Humankind is now entering the most crucial period of its existence when it will have to accept that UFOs can no longer be classified as unidentified objects. During World War II, unusual flying objects were observed in many parts of the world. In February 1942, U.S. President Theodore Roosevelt received a memorandum from General George Marshall stating that the 37th Anti-Aircraft Brigade fired on unidentified aircraft near Los Angeles. A total of 1,430 shells were fired, but not a single plane was shot down, and no bombs were dropped on Americans. Photographs of the incident showed disc-shaped objects being fired upon. On December 14, 1944, the New York Times reported the appearance of a new weapon on the Western Front. U.S. Air Force pilots encountered silver spheres over Germany, flying either in groups or alone. They often accompanied American planes over Germany, though they didn't approach closer than 30 meters. Similar phenomena were reported during U.S. military actions against Japan. It was unclear how these star-like spheres stayed in the air and what their purpose was, but pilots named them Foo Fighters, meaning phantom or satanic forces. In October 1943, a series of silver discs, about 10 centimeters in diameter, were spotted during a raid on Schweinfurt. One bomber flew through a dense group of these discs, brushing them with its right wing without any damage occurring. On March 6, 1942, after a raid on Essen, a British bomber was pursued over the Zuiderzee by a bright orange sphere. Gunners opened fire at a distance of 150 meters, to no effect. Eventually, the object disappeared at great speed. In December 1944, two large orange spheres pursued a British night fighter near Hagenau, Germany. The pilot began to change course and flying style, but the pursuers repeated his maneuvers to precision, almost like they were reading his mind. After 2 minutes of chasing, they retreated and disappeared. On January 2, 1945, the New York Times reported similar objects over France. According to pilot Ben Myers, his plane was chased but unharmed. In November 1944, American bomber pilots from the 415th Squadron based in England saw 10 glowing discs flying in formation at incredible speed over France. On December 23, 1944, General Dwight Eisenhower called the mysterious floating balls a secret German weapon. The Germans, in turn, thought them an American novelty. The Germans first encountered unknown technology in 1942 at the Peenemünde testing site, where V-1 and V-2 rockets were later launched for bombings over England. In March 1942, a Messerschmitt 109 fighter was sent to intercept an unknown object approaching a German airfield in Norway. The pilot reported seeing a cigar-shaped vessel about 100 meters long and 15 meters wide, without markings, but with visible antennas. After spotting the German plane, the object sharply ascended and disappeared. In September 1944, during the testing of the first German jet, Me-262, a pilot saw a massive object with rows of holes and antennas at an altitude of 12 kilometers. It flew away at a speed of 2,000 kilometers per hour, as reported to the experimental center in Rechlin. A similar object was fired upon by German anti-aircraft gunners over Poland. They registered hits, but saw no result. The object accelerated from 2,000 to 5,000 kilometers per hour and flew away. To monitor such objects, the Luftwaffe created a secret group that existed until Germany's surrender. Since 1946, these visitors began appearing more frequently in the western U.S. states of Idaho, Oregon, Nevada, and Alabama. They appeared over military bases in Northern Europe, too. In the U.S., they flew over atomic weapons laboratories in Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Hanford, and White Sands. They were not only observed by the military. On June 14, 1947, American businessman Kenneth Arnold, president of a fire equipment manufacturing company in Boise, Idaho, flew over the Rocky Mountains in Yakima and saw 9 silent objects. According to him, they bounced in the air like stones skipping over water. I watched them for 2 or 3 minutes and noted they looked like saucers with a smooth surface that reflected the sun like mirrors. Scientists sought plausible explanations for this phenomenon. Dr. Allen Hynek, one of the leading U.S. experts on such phenomena, thought the businessman might have seen a squadron of planes. Professor Monroe believed they were masses of snow blown off the mountains by strong winds. Nevertheless, terms like saucers and plates began circulating from that time onward. Military personnel studying the phenomenon were more definitive. Lieutenant General Nathan Twining, head of U.S. Air Force Materiel Command, in response to a command inquiry, said, "The phenomena are real and not hallucinations. The observed characteristics are very high-speed flight, high maneuverability, and disappearance upon observer approach. Their behavior when planes try to get close to them or detect them with radar suggests that some of the objects are controlled manually, automatically, or remotely." Based on this conclusion, U.S. Secretary of Defense James Forrestal created a group to study the phenomenon under the code name Project Sign. In 1948, the group concluded that the unidentified objects were not Soviet planes, as initially assumed, but more likely extraterrestrial in origin. The Pentagon was satisfied with the first conclusion, but apparently alarmed by the second and disbanded the group. Their report included the case of Captain Thomas F. Mantell, who, in January 1948, attempted to intercept an unknown object in his fighter near Fort Knox. His squadron mates described it as a huge metal drop. The captain became absorbed in pursuit, but soon his plane disappeared from the radar. Later, fragments of the fighter were found scattered over many kilometers. The mysterious object was seen undamaged farther along its route over Godman Air Force Base. The pilot's death could not be explained, although numerous attempts were made. One fantastical explanation suggested the pilot was pursuing Venus. Incidentally, Venus was attributed to many such sightings, even when Venus wasn't even on the horizon. Other pilot sightings were explained as a false sun effect, but this was deliberate misdirection. Meanwhile, projects to study anomalous objects followed one another with enviable regularity. Allen Hynek, a scientific consultant for Project Sign, listed their code names: Discontent, Flicker, Resentment, Bear, hinting at Russians, and the most extensive project, Blue Book, which lasted until 1969. The secrecy of these projects is understandable, considering that for a long time, every saucer sighting, which couldn't be stopped or forced to land, was accompanied by the suspicion that the Soviets had mastered an incredibly effective new weapon. The fact that, soon after the war, the USSR quickly developed atomic bombs and sent a man into space only fueled the Russian factor hypothesis. This hypothesis was even associated with of U.S. Secretary of Defense James Forrestal in the summer of 1949, as he supposedly jumped from a skyscraper window shouting, "Russians!" However, suspicions regarding their former ally soon dissipated. Moscow had no such technology. In the meantime, saucers, spheres, cigars, and donuts continued to perform mind-boggling aerial maneuvers that no earthly technology, let alone pilots, could withstand. In some cases, it was hard to discern any direct military purpose behind these visitors or the logic of their movements. The issue was covered with the pseudonym UFO, thus coining the term ufology, which became popular among enthusiasts in various countries around the globe. Intelligence representatives, government scientists, and specialists from the military-industrial complex still face the fundamental problem of how to deal with an unknown factor intruding into earthly life from some other realm. If extraterrestrial origins were confirmed, all aspects of this new phenomenon, along with its strategic and other consequences, had to be considered. Questions arose, each more troubling than the last. What forces dared to breach our borders? And do they plan to conquer our planet? There might even have been some cunning thoughts. Could contact with them be established? If so, could we borrow something from their incredible technology? This would have been particularly useful to the Americans since, at the time, U.S. powerhawks were drawing up plans for a decisive battle against the supposed source of evil, the Soviet Union. Gaining access to extraterrestrial technology would give either side an unprecedented advantage in the arms race and, as believed in the U.S., could guarantee victory. On November 4, 1952, President Harry Truman ordered the creation of the National Security Agency. According to some American ufologists, one of their goals was to decipher alien communications, study their language, and attempt contact, otherwise known as the Sigma Plan. In November 1953, Dwight Eisenhower was elected U.S. President, inheriting the ever-increasing UFO problem. Former CIA Director Admiral Roscoe G. Hillenkoetter, who had begun these studies, presented the president with documents concerning all UFO crashes since 1947. The new president faced the same dilemma as his predecessor, whether to make these facts public or keep them secret. In any case, the risk was high. These phenomena, abnormal from the perspective of ordinary citizens, could lead the public to believe that the government was helpless in its inability to handle an external threat. Such incidents could easily incite panic among Americans who hadn't faced attacks on their territory since British rule. Thus, the government decided to mask its true intentions. How? With lies, of course. This line was maintained long after Eisenhower's presidency. On October 7, 1967, after 2 turbulent years in which saucer sightings became particularly common, the University of Colorado established a commission bringing together renowned scientists. This commission was intended to replace all manner of groups like BEAR, which had proven insufficiently equipped to handle the scale of the issue. The new commission worked under a contract between the university and the U.S. Air Force. According to the terms, the work should be carried out in conditions of absolute objectivity on the part of investigators, who, as much as possible, should not have a preconceived opinion on UFOs. The degree of so-called impartiality was best exemplified by the statement of Dr. Edward Condon, a well-known nuclear scientist and head of the commission. The mission, he said, has very little chance of discovering the existence of these objects, which I consider pure hallucinations. The commission included Robert Oppenheimer, a key organizer of U.S. atomic bomb development, astrophysicist Donald Menzel, magnetism and ionosphere expert Lloyd Berkner, astronomer Allen Hynek, and several CIA personnel. These CIA members guided the commission according to government instructions. What were these instructions? In a secret memorandum by Dr. Robert Lowe, the commission's secretary, it was stated, "Our study should lead to a body of evidence that will impressively explain the non-reality of UFO observations. The trick should be to frame the project in a way that would appear to the public as objective research and to scientists as the findings of a group of skeptics who are honestly trying to be objective, but have no real hope of finding conclusive evidence. In other words, a deliberate falsification was required. From January 14th to 17th, 1953, the CIA held a scientific advisory meeting in Washington on unidentified flying objects. Among the participants was Dr. Howard P. Robertson himself, a professor at the California Institute of Technology and a specialist in cosmology and relativity theory. As a CIA employee, he also headed the Department of Weapons Assessment at the Department of Defense. Another prominent participant was Dr. Luis W. Alvarez, a physicist who had worked on radar and atomic bomb development. In 1963, he was awarded the Nobel Prize. Samuel A. Goudsmit, a founder of theoretical physics who conducted post-war operations to bring top German weapons experts to the U.S., was also part of the meeting. Astronomer Dr. Thornton Page, who was also connected to the military-industrial complex due to his work with the Navy's artillery laboratory, was also included. Another participant, Lloyd W. Berkner, held key positions in Pentagon research centers during the war. The Robertson Bureau studies were meant to support the Condon efforts. Members included Project Blue Book scientific advisor J. Allen Hynek, missile specialist Frederick Durant, new CIA Director Alan Dulles, Project Blue Book head Edward Ruppelt, Marshall Chadwell, CIA Scientific Research Chief Albert Chopp, and Air Force intelligence heads General W. Garland, Colonels W. Smith and W. Adams. The commission was asked to review documents and photos selected by the CIA and choose one of three conclusions. UFO reports can be explained by natural phenomena or objects of earthly origin, and the investigation should be terminated. Reports do not allow a conclusive decision. Project Blue Book should continue research. UFOs are spacecraft of extraterrestrial origin. The final report indicated that UFOs posed no direct threat to U.S. security and provided no evidence of extraterrestrial origin. It was simultaneously recommended that the public be denied access to information available to the Air Force, explaining that reported sightings could be given ordinary explanations. The recommendation was also made to flood communication channels with fictitious messages to induce a wave of skepticism toward such reports. Thanks to the Robertson Bureau's recommendations, numerous cartoons featuring aliens were released in American film and television, aiming to trivialize the matter as a sort of fad or public craze. Following a review of the Bureau's results at higher CIA and Pentagon levels, it was decided to increase control over UFO reports and keep them secret. This implied that UFOs were indeed real and crucial to U.S. and Western security in general. This was also indicated by an order from NATO's Supreme Commander, U.S. General Norstad, to closely monitor UFOs, photograph them if possible, and track them by radar. This order was issued in 1959. As James E. McDonald, Dean of the American Institute for Atmospheric Physics Studies, later stated, the reports issued to the press served as a cover for the CIA's secret recommendation to systematically understate UFOs to reduce public interest in the phenomenon. Ironically, 1967, the year this statement was made, became a year of widespread UFO sightings. On January 1, 1969, the Condon Commission prepared its report. It cost American taxpayers $523,000 and consisted of 1,500 pages. The conclusion was categorical: UFOs do not exist. According to these respected scientists, witnesses of various phenomena were misled by atmospheric electricity and meteorological events, or were victims of their own hallucinations. Commission members Dr. D. Saunders, a psychology professor at the University of Colorado, and Dr. D. McDonald, who had already been mentioned, disagreed with the Commission's conclusions and were removed from it. Dr. Saunders explained Condon's behavior by calling him a politician in science. In other words, one who manipulated findings to fit political demands. Interestingly, even before the Commission's report was published, a decision had already been made in December 1968 for the U.S. Air Force to stop studying the phenomenon, supposedly because UFOs posed no threat to national security. The paradox was that UFOs were then declared non-existent altogether. 10 influential scientists on the Commission, however, spoke in favor of continuing the research. Only Donald Menzel opposed it. He had previously written a special paper asserting that UFOs don't exist, and even claimed it was all nonsense. The atmosphere in which the Commission operated is best exemplified by the fact that out of 15,000 observations, it analyzed fewer than 100. The Commission members overlooked that several analyzed cases, including numbers 2 and 46, contained the conviction that observers had indeed encountered UFOs. Strangely, Menzel himself stated in one of his works that Einstein's theory of the speed of light as a universal limit was only valid for calm systems like the solar system. Rotating magnetic disks, however, could generate speeds exceeding the speed of light. He came to this conclusion, he claimed, by studying UFOs. So UFOs did indeed exist for him. Until he died in 1977, Menzel never clarified this contradiction. Allen Hynek and several other scientists created their own UFO Research Institute as a counter to the Condon Commission. Scientists thus divided into those who did not consider the issue closed and those who sought to close it with all their might. Behind the latter loomed the shadow of government forces. The former head of Project Blue Book, Edward Ruppelt, later claimed that the CIA forced the Air Force to discredit UFO witnesses, including Air Force pilots. Significantly, in April 1952, the Air Force Command refused to listen to Navy Secretary Daniel Kimball, who had personally seen 2 disc-shaped UFOs flying over Hawaii. When Kimball tried to involve his department in the investigation, the CIA managed to get him removed. In this regard, Wilbert Smith, a specialist in geomagnetism from Canada's Ministry of Transport, noted in a memo that the flying saucer issue was classified at a higher level than the hydrogen bomb in the U.S. government. After a mass appearance of saucers over Washington in 1952, the CIA's Scientific Intelligence Division prepared a secret memorandum. It emphasized U.S. national security concerns and the desirability of organizing UFO interception. At the U.S. National Security Council, they highlighted the need to keep the problem hidden from the public, but to use it in psychological warfare with the USSR. Based on these recommendations, on November 4, 1952, President Harry Truman created the National Security Agency by a secret order, assigning it to gather information on UFOs and assess the potential threat to the U.S. According to some reports, before he died in 1976, Edward Condon admitted that the CIA forced his commission to draw conclusions contrary to the evidence. Stay tuned for Episode 2, where we delve into classified documents. These papers, obtained through FOI requests, prove that the U.S. government have known, for a very long time, that UFOs are from another world.